Hello, my name is Glinda. I'm 67 years old and I want to share a story that changed my life. My son, Marcus, threw away all my memories from the basement photo albums, my late husband's military medals, my children's artwork, calling them trash. Then, without even asking me, he built a game room for his friends. When he proudly said, "Mom, stay out tonight. This place is for us," something inside me finally broke. I had always been patient, always forgiven, but this crossed a line I couldn't ignore. So, when the big opening night came, I opened the door and whispered, "Go on, boys." My 5 German shepherds sprinted inside, led by my loyal Kaiser. And the chaos that followed was exactly the kind of excitement Marcus had been craving, but in a way he never expected. That night, standing in the doorway, I realized that something had shifted forever. The boy I had raised, the son I loved, had underestimated me completely. And as the chaos unfolded, I knew it was just the beginning of a journey I could never have predicted. One filled with betrayal, discovery, and ultimately, a fight for justice and reclaiming my life. But what happened next? How did I find out what Marcus had been hiding for years? And how did I turn the tables in ways he never imagined? There's so much more to this story, but before we go any further, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your comments and knowing where you are. Now let's understand how this story really began. I had always considered the basement my sanctuary. Even though the house was filled with memories, the basement held the deepest pieces of my past framed photographs. Medals my late husband Tom had earned during his service, and my children's artwork from when they were little. Each item had a story, a heartbeat of its own. It was a place where I could retreat from the noise of the world, from Marcus's restless energy, from the relentless passage of time that had begun to weigh on me. Kaiser, my loyal German shepherd, always followed me down the steps, his large body brushing against mine in a comforting rhythm, as though sensing every emotion before I could even name it. That evening, I was descending the basement steps with a tray of cookies, thinking about the letter from Diane I'd received earlier. She was a kind soul who had moved next door recently, and her note promised a cup of coffee and friendly conversation, something I hadn't looked forward to in years. But before I could savor that thought, I heard Marcus's voice echoing from the bottom of the stairs. The words stopped me cold, slicing through my chest like a jagged knife. "Mom, stay out tonight. This place is for us." His tone was cocky, playful, dismissive, as if the space I had cherished for decades belonged to a stranger. I froze at the top of the stairs, the tray clattering onto the steps. My hands shook. "Marcus," I began, my voice small, almost pleading. "What are you?" "Nothing, Mom." "Just some fun with the guys. Go on, leave." He laughed, the sound hollow and cruel, as if he understood the sting of his words. It was the final line. Everything inside me broke in that instant. I had always been patient with Marcus, forgiving him countless slights, trusting him even when his actions made no sense. But this was different. My treasures, the echoes of Tom, the fragments of my children's laughter captured in crayon and watercolor, were being tossed aside as if they were nothing. As if I were nothing. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I could feel Kaiser's eyes on me, wide and alert, reflecting the tension in the room. He nudged my hand gently, pressing his massive head against my thigh, reminding me that I wasn't alone. I looked down at him, our silent understanding flowing between us. The betrayal I felt, the loss, the rage, they were shared between us, and somehow that gave me strength. I stepped down the stairs slowly, letting the shadows of the basement embrace me. Marcus and his friends had been so loud upstairs. I could hear the thumps and laughter seeping down. I could imagine them spilling into the empty spaces where my memories had once been. When I reached the bottom, my hands brushed over the boxes and albums, now reduced to broken, torn pieces. My chest tightened. "You don't understand," I whispered to the empty room. "These were my life, my memories, my husband's honor. Kaisa growled low in his throat, and instinctively I reached for his collar. It was time. I could feel the storm building inside me, a fire I hadn't allowed myself to ignite in years. I moved toward the stairs again, but this time with purpose. The sound of my footsteps carried with them a new authority, one Marcus had never witnessed. I opened the door at the top and my voice was calm, icy, a whisper meant to slice through arrogance. "Go on, boys." At first, they didn't notice the subtle tension, the slight tilt in my head, the way my eyes glinted in the light. Then Kaiser and the other 4 German shepherds bolted from the basement. Their paws thundered on the floor, their barks a symphony of controlled chaos. The party froze. Chips and cups tumbled. Laughter turned to screams. Marcus's friends stumbled, trying to catch the dogs, their bravado vanishing like smoke in the air. Marcus stood at the center, his face pale, his mouth open, searching for words that wouldn't come. "What? What is this?" he managed to stammer, fear mingling with outrage. I leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed, my expression calm, almost detached. "You threw away my treasures," I said softly, my words deliberate, measured. "Now yours are gone too." I didn't have to explain further. The dogs were doing that for me, their presence an extension of my will, my protection, my righteous fury. For the first time in years, I felt that surge of power, of reclaiming what was mine, not just the basement, but the respect and recognition I had been denied. Kaiser brushed against my leg, his tail wagging with restrained excitement, as if he understood the weight of the moment. And even as Marcus screamed, his voice breaking in panic and anger, I felt a strange sense of relief. The betrayal, the pain, the years of silent endurances all had been acknowledged in this singular, defiant act. I knew deep down that this was only the beginning. The basement was mine, my memories were mine, and finally, my voice mattered. Marcus might have thought he could erase the past, control the present, and dictate the future, but he had underestimated the strength that had been quietly growing in me all along. And with Kaiser at my side, I was ready for whatever came next. The morning light spilled weakly through the curtains, brushing the edges of the living room in a pale, hesitant glow. I woke to a pounding headache and the lingering echoes of the previous night Marcus's laughter. The chaos, the panic on his friends' faces as the dogs charged through the house. My chest still felt tight, my hands trembled slightly, but there was a quiet satisfaction lingering under the surface. That satisfaction evaporated the moment Marcus stormed into the kitchen, his anger thick and suffocating like smoke in a closed room. "You're paying for this," he spat, throwing a crumpled note on the table. I bent to pick it up. It was an invoice, one I had never seen before, demanding $3,500 for damages. "Or get out," he hissed, his eyes wild. "This is my house, Mom. Dad left it to me. I don't want you here anymore." I felt as if the floor beneath me had opened, swallowing my heart. My lips parted, but no words came. I couldn't reconcile what I was hearing with what Tom had promised me. The gentle, enduring promise that I would always have a home. That I would never be left alone in the world without sanctuary. I stared at him, my hands clenched tightly on the edge of the counter, my knuckles whitening. "Marcus, that's not..." My voice faltered, breaking somewhere between disbelief and despair. He slammed the fridge door, rattling the magnets and the photographs that still clung there like stubborn memories. "Not what?" he barked. "You think you get to tell me what's mine? Everything in this house is mine now." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm, to speak without letting him see the storm building inside me. "Marcus, we need to talk about this." Calmly. But he didn't hear me. He never did when his sense of entitlement was inflamed. That afternoon, with Kaiser following silently at my heels, I drove to see Richard Malone, Tom's oldest and dearest friend, the man who had been by our side for decades, quietly observing and guiding from the wings. Kaiser sat in the passenger seat, his head resting on the center console, eyes alert, ears twitching at every sound of the tires on the uneven road. I drew comfort from his steady presence, the warmth of his body and the deep, unspoken loyalty that bound us together. Richard greeted us at the door with his usual measured smile, though I could see concern flicker in his eyes the moment he noticed my expression. I handed him the papers Marcus had left on the counter, along with the documents Tom had entrusted to me years ago. "Richard," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "I don't know what he's done, or what's real anymore. I need you to tell me the truth." Richard nodded, his fingers deftly flipping through the will, his brow furrowing as he read. He paused, lingering over a section I hadn't noticed before. "Glenda," his voice softened, hesitant, almost fragile. He looked up, meeting my eyes with a gravity that sent a shiver down my spine. "Tom left a second document. A trust. The house. It's actually yours. Marcus only manages it until you pass. He has no ownership." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words felt unreal, a mixture of relief and fury swirling inside me. 3 years. Marcus had been lying to me for 3 years, feeding me the illusion that I had no home, that everything my husband had built and promised had been stolen from me. The betrayal cut deeper than any words could convey, a sharp ache that made my stomach knot and my hands tremble. Kaiser nudged my leg, his warm presence grounding me, and I bent down to stroke his head, trying to anchor myself in reality. "Are you sure?" I whispered, my voice cracking, the weight of years pressing down on me. Richard placed a steady hand over mine. "I've reviewed everything. I wouldn't say this lightly. Glenda, this is yours. He has no legal right to demand anything from you. None." Even as the words sank in, another revelation struck me. Richard adjusted his glasses, hesitating before he spoke again. "There's more. Marcus took out a loan against the house. $80,000. Without your knowledge, without your consent. He's been using it for... well, I'll let you imagine." I closed my eyes, my breath catching. Rage surged, hot and sharp, threatening to spill over. My hands shook, fingers curling into fists at my sides. The image of him laughing with his friends, throwing away my treasures, and now stealing from me, my own home, my husband's legacy, fueled a fire I had kept buried for decades. I could feel it in my chest, a storm of betrayal, grief, and anger all colliding, and yet I stayed calm. My voice, when I finally spoke, was soft, controlled, deliberate. "Don't tell him we know yet." I looked at Kaiser, whose amber eyes met mine with understanding, and I let my fingers stroke his fur, grounding myself in his loyalty. "I need time to plan. I need to be ready. This isn't over, not by a long shot." Richard nodded, recognizing the steel beneath my fragile exterior. "You'll need to move carefully. He's manipulative and he knows how to push buttons, but you have the law on your side. The trust protects you. And now, you know the truth." I exhaled slowly, the tension in my shoulders easing slightly. The basement, the memories, the pieces of Tom's life and mind, they weren't lost. Not yet. And with Richard's guidance, with Kaiser by my side, I would reclaim what was rightfully mine. Not in anger alone, but with the calculated, deliberate strength that had been quietly building inside me for years. We left the office, the air outside sharp and clean, filling my lungs with purpose. Kaiser walked close, his paws barely making a sound on the sidewalk, and I whispered to him, my voice just above a breath, "This is only the beginning, boy. Only the beginning." For the first time since Tom passed, I felt a spark of hope, mingled with the bitter sting of betrayal, but this time I was ready. Marcus may have thought he controlled my world, but he had underestimated the resilience of a mother, the loyalty of a dog, and the quiet, simmering power that comes from finally knowing the truth. The air was crisp that afternoon, the kind of Oregon chill that makes your cheeks burn gently and your lungs feel alive with each breath. I wrapped my coat tighter around me, Kaiser at my side, his leash loose but his body alert, every muscle coiled and relaxed at once. Walking through the neighborhood, I tried to process the events of the past 24 hours. Marcus's betrayal had settled over me like a thick fog, his words still ringing in my ears, and my hands instinctively brushed over my hair as if I could smooth out the jagged edges of my own heartbreak. Kaiser walked quietly, his large head swinging slightly, ears twitching at the sound of distant traffic or the rustle of a squirrel in the yard. I felt comforted by his presence, the way he moved with a deliberate patience that mirrored my need to gather myself before confronting the chaos that had become my life. I couldn't stop thinking about the basement, the medals, the photographs, the fragments of memory that Marcus had thrown away as if they were nothing. Each step we took down the sidewalk carried the weight of that loss, yet in his steady presence, I felt a flicker of reassurance. Someone was still by my side, unwavering, loyal, and watchful. As we rounded the corner, I noticed a woman tending to her garden. She was older, her hair a silvery cascade just past her shoulders, moving with a quiet grace and focus that immediately drew my attention. I remembered seeing her move in a few weeks ago, boxes strewn across her lawn as she settled into the house next to mine. Something about her presence felt grounding, familiar, yet strong. "Hello," I called softly, not wanting to startle her. Kaiser sniffed cautiously at her shoes, his tail swishing gently. She looked up and smiled warmly, setting down the trowel. "Hi there. You must be my neighbor. I'm Diane." Her eyes crinkled at the corners, radiating kindness, and I felt a sudden sense of relief. Someone who might see me not just as a frail, older woman, but as a person with depth, history, and resilience. "I'm Glenda," I said, forcing a small smile, my voice betraying just enough hesitation to show the truth of my nerves. "I live just next door." "Well, it's lovely to finally meet you. Would you like some coffee?" she asked, her tone casual but sincere, and I felt a warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the liquid in the cup. We settled into her kitchen, sunlight spilling across the tabletop, Kaiser lying at my feet with his head resting on my lap. I felt his weight, comforting and grounding, as if he could sense the turmoil that twisted inside me. Diane poured the coffee and regarded me quietly, her gaze gentle but probing. "Glenda, you look troubled," she said softly, placing a hand on mine. "Tell me what's wrong." The words I had been holding back for days rushed out in a torrent, a dam finally breaking. I told her about the basement, the way Marcus had thrown away my memories as if they were nothing. The lies he had told, the forged documents, the loan he had taken against the house. I told her about the crushing disbelief, the sense of betrayal that felt like a physical weight pressing on my chest, and the fear that I was losing everything I had built, everything my husband had promised me. Diane listened with quiet intensity, her eyes never leaving mine, nodding slowly as if absorbing not just my words, but the pulse of my emotion. "Glenda," she said finally, her voice calm but firm, "let me dig into his finances. Something doesn't add up here. No one should have that much control without proper oversight." I exhaled, relief mingling with a flicker of hope. For the first time in weeks, it felt as if I weren't entirely alone. Diane's offer was more than practical. It was a recognition that my pain was valid, that my intuition was right, that I had allies in this battle I hadn't even realized I needed. Kaiser shifted, nudging my hand with his nose, and I let my fingers run through his fur. I whispered to him, "We're not done yet, boy." Not by a long shot. His eyes met mine, steady, understanding, almost human in their empathy, and I felt my resolve harden. That night, the fragile sense of calm was shattered. Marcus returned home, the stench of alcohol trailing him like a dark cloud. He was loud, careless, reckless, laughing with friends who stumbled around the living room as if they owned the space. My stomach tightened, a familiar knot of fear and anger coiling within me. Still here? Pathetic, he sneered, his voice thick with intoxication, laced with mockery and disdain. I bit my tongue, the words I longed to say trapped behind the barricade of my self-control. Every muscle in my body urged me to explode, to confront him with everything I had learned, everything I suspected, everything I now knew about the life he was trying to steal from me. But I remained silent, my eyes burning with quiet fury, a fire that only Kaiser seemed to sense fully. He barked once, low and warning, and I felt a surge of connection, a confirmation that I was not powerless. The bond between us, forged over years of mutual loyalty and shared experience, was stronger than his bravado, stronger than his lies. I would not let him win. Not tonight. Not ever. Sitting in the quiet of the living room, Kaiser resting against me, I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to collect the pieces of my courage and the fragments of my plan. The betrayal still stung, the fear still lurked. But in the knowledge that Diane was willing to stand beside me, that Richard had revealed the truth, and that Kaiser's unwavering loyalty anchored me, I felt the first faint stirrings of hope. The fight ahead would not be easy. It would test every fiber of my being, my patience, my intelligence, my strength. But I was no longer facing it alone, and for the first time, I felt that perhaps, just perhaps, I could reclaim what had been stolen from me and emerge whole. The next few days blurred into a haze of numbers, statements, and quiet reflection. Diane had been relentless, meticulously sifting through bank accounts, credit reports, and transaction records, her eyes scanning every line with a precision that left no detail unchecked. I sat beside her at the dining room table, Kaiser resting his heavy head on my lap, his warmth a constant reassurance, while she muttered softly to herself, tapping her pen against paper, occasionally frowning or shaking her head. When she finally looked up at me, her expression was a mix of disbelief and anger. "Glenda, he's been gambling, online poker, sports bets, tens of thousands. He's losing money he shouldn't even have access to. This isn't just irresponsible." Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of the truth she had uncovered. I felt my stomach twist painfully, a combination of horror, betrayal, and a rising tide of grief. "The $80,000 loan," I whispered, my voice shaking as if even speaking aloud might fracture me further. He used it for this?" Diane nodded grimly, her hand hovering over mine for a moment before she returned to the papers. "Yes. He's been funding a lavish lifestyle while simultaneously risking everything on bets and games of chance. Your trust, the home, he's gambling it all away." I sank back in my chair, the weight of the revelation pressing down with suffocating intensity. How had I not seen this? How had I raised someone capable of such deceit and recklessness? My hands trembled as I buried my face in them, whispering to the empty room, to the memories of Tom, to the ghost of the life I had believed we were building together. How could I raise such a person? The words felt like both accusation and lament, a fracture in my soul I could barely comprehend. Kaiser nudged my arm with his nose, grounding me in the present, reminding me that I was not alone, that I still had allies, that I still had strength. I ran my fingers through his fur, feeling the steady, warm pulse of life beneath my touch, and I realized that despair could not consume me, not entirely, not while he was here. Later that week, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was hesitant, trembling with guilt and fear. It was Jessica, Marcus's girlfriend, younger and evidently fragile under the weight of her conscience. "Mrs. Glenda?" she asked softly. I need to tell you something. He's planning to sell the house. Move to Las Vegas. He doesn't care about what he's doing to you. I I feel awful, but I had to tell you. I felt a cold shiver run through me, my heart catching in my throat. Las Vegas? I echoed, my voice small, vulnerable, and sharp all at once. He he can't just. I paused, swallowing hard, struggling to steady the tremor in my chest. Jessica hesitated, then continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. He told me you were senile, that you were going to be placed in a nursing home soon, but you're not. You're fully capable, and I'm so sorry. I didn't know how else to tell you. Tears blurred my vision, anger and sorrow mingling in a storm that I could barely contain. My fingers clutched the phone as I whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for telling me. I need to think, to plan, but I won't let him win." Kaiser pressed his head closer to my lap, his weight steadying me as my mind raced with possibilities, strategies, and the faintest spark of vindication. Over the next few days, I walked Kaiser for hours, letting the rhythm of our steps and the chill of the air clear my head while I plodded. The leaves crunched beneath our feet, a sound oddly comforting in its consistency. I thought about the basement, about Tom's legacy, about Marcus's lies, and about the life I deserved. My mind traced every option, every move, every risk, and in those long walks, I felt the first flickers of control returning, the kind of control that comes not from dominance or anger, but from clarity and purpose. At dinner that evening, Marcus arrived with the usual swagger, a bottle of wine dangling loosely in his hand, friends trailing behind him. He slouched in the chair across from me, a smirk playing on his lips, as if nothing mattered beyond his amusement. Then, casually, as if it were nothing more than an afterthought, he said, "I found a great assisted living facility for you, Mom. You'll love it." The words hit me like a punch to the chest, a mixture of mockery and cruelty that made my stomach churn. I felt the familiar knot of anger, frustration, and disbelief twisting inside me, but this time I did not respond with immediate outrage. Instead, I breathed slowly, counting the beats of my heart, feeling Kaiser's reassuring presence against my leg, sensing the unspoken strength in his silent support. My eyes met his, and I felt a quiet fury ignite, controlled, deliberate, and precise. I didn't answer. I let the words hang in the air, heavy and absurd, while inside me a plan began to form. Marcus thought he was winning, thought he could manipulate me with his arrogance and lies. But he had underestimated the power of truth, the resilience of someone who had been wronged, and the unwavering bond between a mother and her loyal companion. That night, I lay awake in bed, Kaiser curled against my side, the moonlight casting long shadows across the room. I allowed myself a small, bitter smile as I whispered to him, "We've got work to do, boy. This isn't over, not by a long shot." His deep, contented sigh was the only reply I needed. I felt the storm within me settle into something more potent, resolve. The betrayal, the lies, the reckless gamble of Marcus's life were all pieces of a puzzle, and finally, I was beginning to see the image clearly. For the first time since Tom's death, I felt a flicker of hope, not naive or fragile, but fierce and grounded. The weight of the past could no longer crush me. I had allies, I had information, and I had Kaiser. And as the night wrapped around the house like a protective cloak, I felt the quiet thrill of anticipation, the awareness that justice could be reclaimed, not with anger alone, but with careful, deliberate steps. Marcus might think he was untouchable, but he had not yet met the quiet, unyielding force of a mother who refused to be defeated. I agreed to visit the facility on a gray Thursday afternoon, the kind of day where the sky seemed exhausted and heavy, mirroring something inside me. Marcus insisted on driving, practically humming with triumph, as if he were escorting me to the last chapter of my life. I played my role well, small, quiet, slightly confused, my shoulders rounded inward. I let my hands tremble a little when I reached for the car door. I answered his questions with soft, delayed murmurs. I watched him soak in every detail, every gesture, his smile widening with the belief that I had finally surrendered. Inside the facility, I kept my eyes down, allowing the fluorescent lights to make me appear paler, weaker, more defeated. I asked questions at all the wrong moments, like someone whose mind no longer kept track of order or context. Would Kaiser be allowed to visit? I whispered at one point, letting my bottom lip tremble just enough. Marcus didn't even look at me. Mom, we've talked about this. You need full-time care. The lie slipped from his mouth so easily it barely registered as one. I nodded, as though ashamed, as though agreeing. Inside, something cold and sharp aligned into place. Marcus walked around the facility with the air of a man who had already won, already secured his victory. He squeezed my shoulder once, and I forced myself not to recoil. "You're doing the right thing," he said, sounding almost fatherly. "This is better for both of us." I lowered my eyes, perfectly timed, perfectly placed. What he didn't know was that 2 nights before, I had sat across from Richard, my lawyer now, no longer just the man who helped me file for the loan years ago, and told him everything. The forged signatures, the lies, the threats, the gambling debt, the plan to sell the house behind my back. Richard listened without interruption, his face tightening with every new detail. When I finished, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. "Glinda, we can fight this, but we need to move quickly." And so, we did. Papers were filed, power of attorney documents challenged. An emergency petition to secure my rights and freeze any attempt to sell the house went into motion. Richard's voice was firm, unwavering. "You're not alone in this." For the first time in weeks, I believed him. I also contacted Marcus's employer, a bittersweet decision, because a part of me still wanted to protect him, still wanted to shield him from consequences. But protection had turned into enabling. And enabling had brought us here. When his supervisor answered the phone, she sounded tired, wary. "We haven't seen him in weeks," she said. "He's been calling in sick constantly. Is he all right?" I swallowed hard. "He needs help. And he's hurting others to avoid facing that." She sighed, a long, sad sound that made something inside me wilt. "Thank you for telling us, Mrs. Wallace. We'll handle it from here." After hanging up, I sat for a minute, my fingers trembling. Kaiser nudged me gently, as if sensing the quiet fracture inside my chest. I pressed my forehead against his and whispered, I know, boy. This is just the beginning." Diane worked with me in the evenings, her calm presence grounding me. We sat side by side at her kitchen table, the air warm with the scent of chamomile tea. She helped me open a secret bank account, one Marcus couldn't touch. Together, we transferred my savings, small in amount but enormous in meaning. "This is your safety net," she said softly. "Your fresh start, no matter what he tries." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Kaiser had been different lately, more alert, more watchful. He stayed close to me, sometimes resting his head on my knee with a seriousness that felt almost human. He followed Marcus with quiet suspicion, standing between us when Marcus approached too suddenly. "He knows," I told Diane one night. "He feels it." She smiled sadly. Kaiser's always known who deserves his trust. The real estate agents arrived on a Monday afternoon, 2 women in smart jackets carrying folders and glossy brochures. Marcus strutted behind them like a host giving a private tour of his mansion. I stood at the kitchen counter, my hands wrapped around a cooling mug of tea, watching them wander through the living room where Tom and I once danced barefoot on New Year's Eve. One of the agents pointed toward the fireplace. "This could add value if remodeled." Marcus nodded eagerly, already imagining money he didn't yet have. Every word felt like a blade sliding between old memories, cutting deeper than I expected. I didn't say anything. Not a whisper, not a plea, not a protest. I stood there with Kaiser pressed against my leg, and I let myself feel the heartbreak in full. The grief. The betrayal. The years of believing he was still the boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee. The years of pretending I didn't see the man he was becoming. When Marcus walked past the kitchen on his way to show the agents the basement, he smirked, as though he could already feel the check in his hand, as though he were moments away from discarding me like old furniture. That was when I leaned down, brushing my hand gently over Kaiser's fur, my voice barely a breath. "He'll learn," I whispered, not with rage, not with cruelty, but with a sorrow sharpened into resolve. The kind of resolve that grows only when a heart has been wounded too deeply to ignore truth any longer. Cheeser looked up at me with dark, trusting eyes. And in that small, quiet moment, I knew absolutely, and without hesitation, that the trap was set. And Marcus had already walked into it. The evening air was heavy with anticipation, the kind that makes your chest ache and your palms sweat even before the first words are spoken. Dinner was set quietly, the table illuminated by the soft glow of the chandelier, casting gentle shadows over Richard, Diane, and Jessica, each seated like an army ready to witness a reckoning. Kaiser lay at my feet, ears alert, muscles tense under his thick fur, sensing the storm before it even arrived. I poured myself a cup of tea, the warmth in my hands grounding me, a ritual of calm before the confrontation. I inhaled slowly, letting the scent of chamomile soothe the nerves that threatened to betray me. Marcus arrived later than expected, as if trying to assert control from the outset. His slouched posture and uneven gait speaking of both drunken arrogance and a lurking fear he refused to acknowledge. "Dinner's ready," I said, voice soft but deliberate, forcing calm into every syllable. Marcus barely looked at me, letting his eyes flicker around the table as if sizing up the audience. I set the documents down carefully, deliberately stacking them in the center of the table. The trust, the bank statements showing his gambling losses, the proof of the $80,000 loan. I could feel their weight not just in my hands, but in the history they carried, the betrayal they revealed. "I need you to see this," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "All of it. Everything you've done, everything you've lied about." Marcus glanced at the papers, then back at me, a sneer forming but not fully materializing. "What's this?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly, betraying the first flicker of uncertainty beneath his bravado. I leaned forward, my hands resting on the edge of the table, and met his gaze. "You stole from me. You lied. You tried to erase your father's memory, and mine." For a moment, the room held its breath. The air itself seemed to stiffen, as if even the walls were listening. Marcus's face paled slightly, then reddened as panic clawed its way through his carefully maintained composure. That's not true," he stammered, voice rising. You don't understand. I did all this for you." "Did all this for me?" I echoed, my voice quiet but cutting through the tension like a knife. "You threw away my memories. You gambled away the security I relied on. You lied about my house, about my rights, about the life I was promised. For me?" His panic shifted quickly into anger, a sudden eruption that filled the room with sharp words and slamming fists. "You owe me! I gave up my life to take care of you." His face contorted, veins visible on his forehead, his hands trembling as he pointed at me, accusing, defiant, desperate. I felt the urge to retreat, to fold under the weight of his rage, but I didn't. I took a slow breath, let the warmth of Kaiser pressed against my ankle remind me of my strength, and let the truth roll off my tongue. "Marcus, you've been wrong about me all along. I never needed care. Tom's life insurance left me financially secure. You've manipulated me, played on my love and guilt to control me for your own gain." Silence crashed down like a wave, the kind of silence that leaves ears ringing. I watched his face shift from fury to disbelief, his mouth opening, closing. as if searching for words that didn't exist. Diane sat stiffly, her hands folded neatly on her lap, nodding slightly at me in support. Jessica's eyes glistened with quiet relief, and Richard's gaze was steady, unflinching. Richard leaned forward, his voice calm but commanding. "Marcus, you have 30 days to vacate the property. This eviction notice is effective immediately." He handed the papers across the table, his hand firm, leaving no room for argument. Marcus's reaction was instantaneous. He snatched the papers, crumpling them slightly in his fists, his eyes wild, mouth twisted. "This isn't over. You'll regret this," he shouted, voice cracking with anger and fear mingled together. He stormed toward the door, his boots striking the floor with sharp, heavy thuds, leaving a trail of rage and shattered illusions in his wake. Kaiser growled low in his throat, muscles tensing as if anticipating more. The house seemed to exhale a tense sigh, shadows stretching longer across the walls, as if waiting. That night, sleep refused me. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind through the windows made me jump. Then, faintly, the sound of soft footsteps, too careful, too deliberate, echoed from the hall. My stomach clenched and I sat up, the sheets tangled around me, heart hammering. Kaiser's hackles rose immediately, his body sliding off the bed to stand alert between me and the door. A low, menacing growl vibrated in his chest. My pulse raced, but in his presence, I felt a calm determination settle over me. "Go, boy," I whispered, voice steady despite the fear. "Protect what's ours." The noises grew louder, the shuffle of feet, the metallic jingle of something being moved. My chest tightened, but I did not panic. I reached for the phone, dialing Richard with hands that were steady, despite the adrenaline. "It's him," I whispered, glancing at Kaiser, who barked fiercely, a warning that shook the room. "He's trying to take things. I think he's back." Minutes later, police and security personnel arrived, guided by my earlier reports. Marcus was caught attempting to remove valuables from the house, and his threats dissolved into a stammer of excuses and apologies that no one believed. Kaiser, satisfied that his vigil had succeeded, settled back by my side, ears drooping slightly, eyes watchful but calm. I sank onto the couch, letting my head rest against the cushions, my body trembling with relief, exhaustion, and the quiet rush of justice finally taking hold. The house, my home, was mine again. The betrayal had been answered not with revenge alone, but with truth, with strategy, with the love of those who had stood beside me. Kaiser nudged my hand and I whispered, "We did it, boy. We finally did it." My tears fell quietly, unashamed, a mixture of grief, relief, and catharsis. I knew the fight wasn't entirely over, but for the first time, I felt the balance shifting. Marcus's control had ended. My life, my home, my memories, my legacy was intact. The days after the intervention were supposed to be a relief, a slow return to normalcy, but the world outside the walls of my home had other plans. Marcus, with the audacity only a son who had betrayed his mother could summon, began his campaign in the neighborhood, whispering carefully crafted lies to anyone who would listen. He painted me as mentally unstable, dangerous, and abusive. The kind of stories that curled like smoke through the streets, leaving fear and doubt in their wake. At first, I tried to ignore it, clinging to the truth like a fragile lifeline. I told myself that the people who truly knew me, the neighbors who had shared cups of sugar, conversations over fences, the laughter of shared holidays, would see through the veil of his lies. But doubt is a clever thief, and it crept into even my mind, leaving me questioning whether I was truly standing alone. Some neighbors believed him. A few averted their eyes when I walked past, whispers following in the quiet spaces between their words. One afternoon, I saw a group clustered at the end of the block, nodding toward me, eyebrows drawn in suspicion. My chest tightened, my stomach fluttered with an ache that made my knees weak. I felt suddenly smaller, insignificant, as though the house I had fought so hard to reclaim had shrunk into a cage I could barely navigate. Kaiser stayed close, as always, moving between me and the outside world with a vigilance that reminded me I was not entirely alone. His presence was a tether to sanity, to patience, to the enduring strength I had cultivated in secret. When I sat in the kitchen, he rested his head in my lap, and I would stroke his fur, letting the warmth seep into my bones, reminding myself that I had allies in this battle, that fear and isolation could be tempered by loyalty and love. Diane was tireless. She came over without hesitation, carrying files, documents, photographs, evidence meticulously compiled. "Glinda, we can prove he's lying," she said, her voice steady and firm as if the weight of the neighborhood's whispers could be lifted simply by truth laid bare. Together, we went door to door, showing the neighbors the proof of Marcus's lies. The bank statements, the eviction papers, the records that documented his deception and greed. Slowly, bit by bit, trust returned. People nodded, whispered apologies, small gestures of reconciliation that felt like rays of light cutting through an oppressive fog. But Marcus was not deterred. He retaliated legally, filing a counter-lawsuit claiming I was unfit to manage the property. A claim so absurd it was almost laughable. But laughter is dangerous when your nerves are raw. The stress weighed on me in unexpected ways. My appetite vanished. Meals became a distant necessity rather than comfort. Sleep evaded me, each night a long stretch of staring at shadows on the ceiling, heart thrumming with anticipation of what chaos might strike next. Kaiser, ever intuitive, never left my side. His head rested on the edge of the bed when I lay awake, ears alert for the slightest sound, eyes tracking every movement in the room. He sensed my fragility and refused to abandon me, a silent guardian in a world suddenly fraught with betrayal and fear. Then one morning, the fragile veneer shattered. I had been in the kitchen, brewing tea, the morning light slanting across the counter, when I noticed Kaiser limping slightly. Panic and dread tightened around my throat as I knelt beside him, my hands trembling as I examined his leg. Bruises bloomed under his fur, and I realized with horror what had happened. Marcus, he had come back, cornered by his own frustration, and in a moment of anger he had kicked Kaiser. My loyal companion, the one who had never wavered, had been hurt in my stead. The shock sent a shiver through me, tears pooling in my eyes as rage, fear, and grief collided in a storm I could not suppress. I held Kaiser close, whispering apologies and reassurances, but deep inside, something primal awakened. The protective instinct I had always felt toward my children, my family, now fused with a raw, unstoppable force. He can hurt me, I thought, rocking Kaiser gently in my arms. He can frighten me, he can try to intimidate me, he can challenge everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty, but he will never, ever hurt Kaiser again. That anger transformed into clarity, into a determination I had not known I possessed. My fear of confrontation, of judgment, of loss, melted into resolve. Marcus had underestimated me. He had always believed my patience and kindness would bend like a reed in the wind, that I would forgive, that I would yield. But he had crossed a line no mother could ignore, a line where the safety of the innocent, the loyal, the pure, the ones who had never betrayed her, was violated. I spent that day planning, every step precise, every move deliberate. I reviewed legal filings, checked on security cameras, documented injuries, and coordinated with Diane. I could feel Marcus's shadow lurking in every crevice of my mind, but the fear no longer held dominion over me. I would not let him intimidate or isolate me. My strength had transformed. It was no longer the quiet endurance of a patient mother. It was the fierce, unwavering resolve of someone defending what was hers, protecting those who could not speak for themselves. That evening, as Kaiser lay at my feet, licking my hand and offering comfort with quiet devotion. I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The counterattack had begun, but this time, the tide had turned. Marcus's lies, threats, and intimidation would meet with truth, strategy, and the unyielding force of a mother who refused to be broken. I whispered to Kaiser, my voice soft but resolute, "We're not afraid anymore. They'll see it soon. We'll protect what's ours. And they'll learn that some lines, once crossed, awaken a power that cannot be silenced." Kaiser's eyes met mine, dark and unwavering, and in that gaze, I felt the full weight of courage, the quiet strength of endurance, and the clarity of justice yet to come. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, I was no longer merely reacting. I was leading. And Marcus would soon realize that every step he took against me, against us, had consequences he had never anticipated. The morning light came through the blinds in sharp stripes, cutting across the living room floor and catching on the dust motes that danced like tiny ghosts in the air. I sat at the table with Kaiser lying close, his head on my lap, and the weight of the past weeks pressing heavily against my chest. Diane had come over early, carrying a stack of folders and papers, her face serious but resolute. She had discovered something I hadn't dared imagine. Marcus was not just reckless with his money, his home, his trust, but he had been embezzling from his employer. A fraud scheme, so deliberate it left a pit in my stomach and a shiver crawling down my spine. Richard's words had echoed in my ears since our first conversation about it. "Glenda, this isn't just family drama. This is criminal, and it's not small scale. He could face years in prison if this is proven." I stared down at the mug in my hands, tracing the cracks in the ceramic with my thumb, and my mind spun. How could I choose? Reporting him would destroy his life. He was my son, the boy I had carried, nurtured, loved unconditionally. But protecting him meant betraying justice, letting lies and greed continue unchecked, letting the world be deceived and harmed. My chest tightened, tears welling up unbidden. A silent storm of grief and guilt. Kaiser nudged my hand gently, his warm nose pressing into my fingers. I looked down at him, the steady, unwavering eyes I had come to rely on, and I heard Tom's voice, soft but firm, in my memory. "Kindness without boundaries is weakness, Glenda. Remember that. Kindness must be tempered with truth and courage." I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. The warmth of Kaiser, the truth of Diane and Richard's meticulous work, and the clarity of my own conscience crystallized into a single decision. I could no longer protect Marcus from the consequences of his actions. I had to act. The call to his employer was one I had dreaded and postponed, my fingers hovering over the phone for what felt like hours. Finally, I pressed the buttons, my voice trembling but steady. "This is Glenda Wallace. I need to report fraud. My son, Marcus Wallace, has been involved in embezzling funds from your company." The line went silent for a moment, then a sigh, sharp and professional. "Mrs. Wallace, thank you for bringing this to our attention. We will investigate immediately." The hours that followed were a blur of phone calls, emails, and the cold, clinical process of reporting crime. I felt an ache deep in my chest, a mother's ache, the kind that pierces your heart and twists your soul, but also a strange sense of relief. Truth at last was being acknowledged. Later that afternoon, a knock at the door shattered the fragile calm of the house. Kaiser leapt up immediately, growling low in his throat, his body rigid. I opened the door to find Marcus standing there, a pleading, desperate expression on his face. His eyes, once filled with arrogance, now glistened with tears, his hands raised in a silent plea for mercy. "Mom, please," he said, voice cracking, trembling with a mixture of fear and regret. "I'm your son. Help me. I didn't know it would go this far. Please." My chest tightened, and for a heartbeat I felt that old tug of instinct, the urge to protect, to forgive, to soothe the boy who had once scraped his knee or cried on my shoulder after a nightmare. But the boy I had raised, the man standing before me, had made choices that severed the bonds of trust and love. My eyes stung with tears as I stepped back, the door pressing against my hand. "You stopped being my son when you threw away your father's medals," I said, my voice breaking but resolute. "You chose deception over honesty, greed over love, lies over the family we had. I will not protect what you have already destroyed." He shook his head, silent sobs racking his body, and reached toward me. I could see the shame etched across his face, the fear of consequences finally settling in, but I did not move. I could feel Kaiser at my side, body pressed against mine, offering the steady, unwavering loyalty that Marcus had betrayed. The dog's presence was a reminder that love and protection could still exist, even when betrayal had darkened the human heart. I closed the door slowly, deliberately, the finality pressing like a weight against my shoulders. Behind it, Marcus's cries echoed faintly, fading into the distance, leaving me in the quiet stillness of my home. My hands shook, tears streaking my cheeks, and I sank to the floor, Kaiser curling at my side, resting his head on my knee. I buried my face against him, letting the sobs come freely, the grief and release mingling in the warmth of his fur. For a long while, I allowed myself to feel everything: the betrayal, the sadness, the anger, the relief. I let the truth settle, heavy, but just like sunlight through a winter window. Marcus would face the consequences of his actions. The law, the world, and his own choices would hold him accountable. And I had acted with courage, with justice, and with the strength that Tom had always believed was inside me. Kaiser licked my hand softly, nudging me with the quiet insistence that life continued, that healing could begin even after the deepest wounds. I stroked him gently, whispering, "We're safe, boy. At last, we're safe." And in that moment, I realized that protection, honesty, and love tempered with courage were the true legacy I could leave behind. Marcus might be lost to his own mistakes, but the home, the truth, and the bond between me and those who stood with me were untouchable. Tears blurred my vision, but for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of peace. The house was mine. Justice was unfolding. And for the first time in a long while, I could breathe without the suffocating weight of fear pressing against my ribs. The morning of the hearing felt impossibly heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. I woke before dawn, the house quiet except for Kaiser's steady breathing at my side. I ran my fingers through his fur, letting the familiar warmth calm the nerves twisting my stomach into knots. Today, everything would be laid bare. Marcus would stand not just against me, but against the law, against truth itself, and I would have to face him in full glare of a courtroom, with everyone watching, judging, waiting for the first crack in my composure. Richard arrived early, briefcase in hand, papers meticulously organized. His calm presence was a balm, but even his confidence could not completely mask the storm building in me. Diane and Jessica were there too, their quiet support anchoring me. We shared a few words over coffee soft, tentative, but the silence between us held the unspoken acknowledgement that the coming hours would test every ounce of courage I possessed. When we entered the courtroom, the smell of polished wood and legal formalities settled over me. The judge's gaze was steady, impartial, but sharp. I could feel Marcus's presence before I even saw him, leaning back in his seat, smirking faintly, eyes darting to catch my expression. I swallowed, letting Kaiser stay at my feet, a silent reminder of loyalty, protection, and quiet strength. The proceedings began. Marcus's lawyer wasted no time painting me as vengeful, controlling, a woman whose anger and bitterness had clouded her judgment. He spoke with conviction, leaning into every stereotype he could exploit: my age, my patience, my history of being gentle and forgiving. but I held myself upright, letting each word wash over me without touching the foundation of truth I had built. Then Richard rose. The room seemed to hold its breath as he laid out the evidence. One by one, documents, bank statements, the forged trust papers, the gambling debts, the embezzlement reports, each piece a thread in the web of deception Marcus had spun. My hands trembled slightly as I glanced at the piles on the table, but my voice remained steady when he asked if I could confirm them. "Yes," I said quietly. "I've seen these records myself. This is my life, my home, my security. And this is how he betrayed me." Jessica's testimony was next. She spoke with a mixture of guilt and relief, her voice steady but carrying the weight of fear she had held for so long. She revealed Marcus's plan to institutionalize me, to make me appear incapable of managing my own life, all to seize the house and money that were rightfully mine. I watched her carefully, noticing the tremor in her hands, the tightness in her jaw, the courage it took to speak truth against someone so close to her. Diane followed, presenting financial records meticulously prepared, proving beyond doubt that Marcus had stolen over $120,000 from me. Every ledger, every transfer, every manipulated check came alive under her calm explanation. My heart tightened with a mix of sorrow and vindication. Sorrow for the betrayal, vindication for the justice finally taking shape before my eyes. Marcus fidgeted, his confident smirk faltering as each piece of evidence dismantled the image he had tried to maintain for years. The courtroom, once a stage for his arrogance, became a theater of truth. I felt the weight of years of patience, kindness, and quiet endurance lift slowly from my shoulders. Finally, the judge spoke. Her voice was firm, measured, and deliberate. "The court rules in favor of Glenda Wallace. The house is legally hers. Marcus Wallace is to repay all stolen funds and a restraining order is hereby issued. Further, he is sentenced to probation and community service for his acts of fraud." A quiet wave of relief washed over me, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. I blinked, trying to steady myself, feeling the trembling of exhaustion and release coiled deep in my chest. I had fought, waited, planned, and endured, and now the scales of justice had tipped in my favor. Outside the courthouse, the air was sharp, crisp, carrying the echo of the city in motion. Marcus appeared behind me, his face twisted in rage, shouting accusations, insults, threats. I felt the sting of anger, the pull of old habits urging me to answer, to justify, to defend. But I didn't. I walked past him, slow, deliberate, head held high. Kaiser patted at my side, steady and loyal, a quiet reminder that protection and love could endure even in the presence of fury and betrayal. I felt something I hadn't in years: freedom. The weight of manipulation, lies, and fear lifted, leaving space for something I had almost forgotten: the right to live unburdened, to make choices for myself, to feel the sun on my skin without the shadow of coercion. My steps felt lighter with every move away from Marcus, every glance toward the life I had fought so hard to reclaim. I paused for a moment at the top of the courthouse steps, looking at Kaiser, his ears twitching with alertness, eyes steady. I smiled, a small, tremulous thing, but genuine. "We did it, boy," I whispered. "We're free. Finally." The city moved around us, indifferent and bustling, but inside me, a quiet cathedral of triumph and release had opened. Every injustice faced, every tear shed, every night of fear had led to this moment. I inhaled deeply, savoring it, letting it fill me completely. The house was mine, the truth was known, and I was no longer a victim. Kaiser nudged my hand, leaning into me, and together, we descended the steps, leaving Marcus behind, and stepping fully into a life reclaimed. A freedom hard-earned, and a peace I had not thought possible. 6 months had passed since the courtroom, and the air in my home felt lighter, almost alive with possibility. The basement, once a place of betrayal and humiliation, had been transformed into something I could barely have imagined in the days when Marcus had mocked me, when the weight of his greed and lies pressed so heavily on my chest that I could barely breathe. Now, the space buzzed softly with life, laughter, and quiet conversations. It smelled faintly of fresh paint and the comforting aroma of coffee from the little corner I had set up for snacks. The fluorescent lights had been replaced with warm, ambient lighting, and the walls were lined with shelves holding books on personal finance, legal rights, and stories of resilience. Diane moved through the room with her usual calm efficiency, setting up chairs for an upcoming workshop. She paused to smile at me, a brief nod of acknowledgement, and I returned it, feeling the depth of gratitude that words could not capture. She had been my anchor in so many ways, her expertise and kindness steadying me when my own fear threatened to overwhelm. Jessica was there too, arranging handouts on the tables. Her youthful energy was infectious, a reminder that even in the aftermath of betrayal, there could be optimism and purpose. She caught my eye and gave a little wave, and I felt a flicker of warmth, thinking of the courage it had taken for her to support me so fully. Kaiser padded gently behind me, his paws soft against the polished wooden floor. He had been officially enrolled in therapy dog training, a title that now fit him perfectly. His gentle nudges, his quiet presence beside anyone who needed comfort, had already begun to calm some of the visitors who were timid, hesitant, unsure of what to expect. I watched him nuzzle an elderly man who had just arrived for the financial literacy class, and my chest swelled with a quiet, unspoken pride. The room was filling with seniors, some clutching notebooks, others simply sitting and listening. I greeted each one with a smile, a hand offered, a gentle word of encouragement. They had come here seeking knowledge, but I realized they were also seeking something I had learned only too well, the reassurance that even after betrayal, even after fear and loss, one could find empowerment, community, and hope. I glanced down at the floor where the memory of Marcus's party, the chaos, the destruction, still lingered like a shadow. It felt almost surreal to think that 6 months ago, this space had been a symbol of selfishness and arrogance. Now, it was a sanctuary, a place where wisdom and compassion replaced deceit, and laughter replaced the mocking jeers that had once echoed off these walls. A letter sat unopened on the counter. Marcus had sent it from court-ordered rehab, a brief apology, an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. I had read it once and folded it neatly back into the envelope. Part of me wanted to respond, to measure forgiveness, to test the limits of my own heart. But the stronger part of me, the part that had learned the hard way about boundaries and self-preservation, knew that now was not the time. Maybe someday, perhaps, when the wounds had fully healed. But not now. Not while the echoes of betrayal were still fresh in memory. I moved across the room, greeting newcomers, watching as Kaiser wagged his tail and leaned into those who needed comfort. He seemed to know the importance of his presence, the weight of reassurance he carried for every hesitant hand that reached out to him. His eyes met mine, and I felt an unspoken conversation between us, a reminder that through all the turmoil, all the fear, all the nights of anxiety and planning, we had survived together. "We did it, boy," I whispered, bending down to scratch behind his ears. "We survived." A young woman approached me, her shoulders trembling, eyes glistening with tears, clutched her purse tightly as though it were a shield. I don't even know where to start," she said, her voice catching, raw and vulnerable. "I've been living with financial abuse from my own family. I don't know what to do." I took her hand gently, feeling the tremor in her fingers, and guided her to a nearby chair. "You're not alone," I said, my voice soft but steady. "Let me help you. We'll figure this out together." And as she began to tell her story, I realized fully that the pain I had endured, years of betrayal, manipulation, and fear, had become something far greater than suffering. It had become a source of power, a wellspring of empathy and strength that could help others find their way out of darkness. Around me, the room hummed with quiet energy. Seniors swapped stories, asked questions, and offered encouragement to each other. Diane answered questions about banking and taxes. Jessica guided participants through exercises on protecting their assets. And Kaiser moved among them, a calm, steady presence, reminding everyone that safety and love could coexist with learning and empowerment. I stood back for a moment, taking it all in. The walls that once confined me with anger and humiliation now echoed with laughter and conversation. The basement, once the scene of my son's selfishness, had become a place of growth, healing, and hope. I felt a deep, suffocating gratitude for Diane, for Jessica, for Richard, for the quiet strength that had carried me through the darkest days, and for Kaiser, who had never left my side. I breathed deeply, letting the energy of the room fill me completely. Every smile, every tear, every word spoken in courage and honesty was a testament to resilience. And I knew that while the past had shaped me, it no longer controlled me. My pain had become my power. My grief had become my purpose. I looked down at Kaiser again, his dark eyes gleaming with gentle understanding. We made it, boy. We finally made it. And in that moment, surrounded by new friends, allies, and people who had found courage through connection, I understood fully that this was only the beginning. The future was ours to shape, and the strength we had discovered would guide us forward. If you followed our journey and felt inspired, please subscribe to the channel and join us as we continue sharing stories of resilience, courage, and hope. You're never alone, and together, we can transform pain into power.